What's going on, folks? You're watching The Hungry Handgunner. I'm Nick, and today continuing with our mini-series on the fundamentals of shooting a handgun. We're out here with my Beretta M9A3. There's no mag inserted and no round in the chamber. Guys, it's always important to know the status of your weapon, whether there's a round in the chamber or not. And before doing any weapons manipulation drills in your home, verify that the chamber is empty and that there is no magazine inserted in the gun. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, especially if there is no cure for hurting yourself or someone you love. Anyway, enough with that. We're going to be talking about today is going to be proper sight alignment with a handgun and kind of how to use the sights. Now, it is always easier to learn good habits from the start rather than bad habits to correct later. Unfortunately, I learned bad habits at the beginning, namely shooting with one eye closed. It may work for rifles with a scope or things like that. With a handgun, you really should shoot with both eyes open. That's going to maximize your peripheral vision, as well as be a little bit faster going from target to target or getting on target in the first place. It's definitely easier to learn that going in than trying to correct yourself from shooting with one eye closed from bad habits. So we went over stance in the last video. We're going to be operating from a standing isosceles. I say operating. We're going to be working with a modified isosceles stance. So go ahead, feet shoulder width apart, nose, you're going to lean forward slightly, get your nose over your toes, and when you bring the gun up, you're going to focus target, get the front sight in focus on the target, make sure that it is even with the rear sight in both height and that there's about an equal amount of daylight on either side of the front sight. I'll show you guys what this looks like first person view here in a second. That's going to be your best course of action to make sure that those sights are aligned. The target should be somewhat blurry, rear sight should be blurry, front sight should be clear. Your focus should be on that front sight. So I'll show you guys what that looks like, first person view, and then we'll talk about micro red dot sights on a handgun. Alright, so bear with me just a little bit. This is going to be kind of tricky to show you, reaching around the camera like this, but here we have the same Beretta M9A3, and you can see that front sight is now in between the rear sights. Try to line it up on the target. But you want to bring that front sight and get it about the same distance between the, there we go, between the rear sight and the same amount of daylight on either side. So that's what a sight picture will look like. Alright folks, so for the next part I'm going to be using my FN 509 tactical handgun. There's no mag inserted, no round in the chamber, and as you guys can see, this gun looks a little bit different. So we have a micro red dot sight, or MRDS, on top of the handgun. This is a Hollow Sun 507C. Some guns are made to accept these sights from the factory, others you can send off and have them milled. But what I wanted to talk about, just before you start getting inundated with things like, oh, those are gadgets you don't need, they have no advantages, that's not true. If you remember, I was telling you that you had to get target in focus, get the sight aligned on the target, the front sight aligned on the target, focus on the rear sight to make sure that the front sight was equal in elevation with equal daylight on each side, and then make sure your focus is back on the front sight. Your eyes are switching between three focal planes. So you're switching between the target, front sight, the rear sight, and then back to the front sight. Evolutionary designs in the human body, we're designed to focus on the threat, not so much what we're fighting with. Think about rocks, clubs, spears, swords. You were never focused on the sword or the spear, you were focused on what you were attacking, right? So with a handgun, it's completely adverse to our nature to focus on this versus whatever the threat is or the target is. Where the red dot comes into play is that I stay focused on the target the entire time, and I wait for that dot to appear on the target. I don't focus on the dot, I'm focused on the target. And even if I switch from either one of my steel targets, my focus shifts from target to target, not so much on the dot. And the dot is kind of getting superimposed over the target is the easiest way I can think of to make that work. So these do have their advantages, however they are technology. Technology can fail. As you can see, this firearm is still equipped with iron sights, a front sight and a rear sight. These sights are a little bit higher to allow me to see over this optic body right here and be able to line them up through the lens, or if the lens were to break, through the aperture, the opening here. But the only way these iron sights wouldn't be functional is if this thing suffered, was crushed, and I highly doubt that's going to happen. Most common failure of these sights would be the battery goes out. This one has solar on top, so the battery lasts a whopping 50,000 hours. Change the battery out once a year, you should be good. Or you take damage to the lens itself. in which case I should still be able to line up these iron sights and make shots should I need them. So I'll give you guys a first-person view of what that looks like. Okay, so bring the handgun up, see the red dot, and you line that red dot up on whatever. You do shoot this with both eyes open, just like iron sights. The 0 for the red dot is definitely off. If you look at the iron sights being lined up, you can tell that the dot is not the same, and that's fine. Your optic is sitting a little higher over bore. The 0 on the optic is not always going to be the true 0 with the irons. So there's that dot again, and we'll go to that other target. This is kind of interesting doing it from this angle and back. Now, I'm by no means telling you that you must run out and buy a red dot optic. I'm just letting you know that if you ever hear somebody say they don't have advantages, that's simply not true. There's been a lot of science looked at as far as the way our eyes work, threat perception, depth perception, focus, things like that, especially focus under stress. They do have advantages, particularly in a duty or defensive handgun. Iron sights, though, they've worked for hundreds of years. They still work. So you don't need one, but if you want one and somebody tries to tell you they don't offer any advantages, they're wrong. I would say it's still a great idea to go ahead and learn with your irons. We're just not at a point where the red dot is prolific enough to be more readily encountered than iron sights. So it would do you well to learn with irons, regardless of what your decision is on the micro red dot or not. But the biggest thing is, guys, try to keep both eyes open. I know it's going to be tempting to shut that non-dominant eye, especially if you've been shooting that way. Make a conscious effort. If you're shooting somewhere where you can have a camera, you don't even have to do YouTube, but just video your shooting and see how you're shooting. Kind of critique yourself after the fact, or have somebody you know and trust critique your shooting after the fact. If you're doing dry fire in your home, again, make sure your weapon's unloaded, but you can have that camera going and pick up on some bad habits, or again, have a trusted friend or somebody that you trust to give you good advice, help you with that. Biggest thing is going to be safe as always. Don't rush it. Stay focused on what you're doing. Have fun with it at the same time, but especially right now with potential ammo shortages due to COVID-19. Make those rounds count. If you're getting out and getting live fire, try to get the most out of those practice sessions. Stay safe. Keep shooting. I'll see you next time.